Jack's last gamble, the heist for the alien's heart. The neon lights of the gilded Nebula Casino pulsed like a heartbeat, casting a kaleidoscope of color over the thrumming crowd. Beings from every corner of the galaxy mingled around holographic gaming tables, their voices rising in a cacophony of excitement, frustration, and triumph. The smell of exotic spices and faintly metallic air filled the station's oxygen mix, a heady combination that made people spend credits they didn't have. Jack Carter leaned back in his seat at the high-stakes table, his trademark smirk plastered on his face. His luck had been running hot all night, and his stack of credits now towered over those of his competitors, a grizzled McAfee trader, a stoic android, and a reptilian Zakoran mercenary. "Feeling lucky, human?" hissed the Zakoran, his scaled hand clutching a handful of chips. Jack flicked a casual glance at the reptile and shrugged. "Luck? Nah, just skill and charm. But don't let me stop you from donating to the Carter Retirement Fund." The Zakoran growled low but stayed in the game. Jack didn't flinch. He knew bluster when he saw it. As the final round began, the casino's atmosphere shifted. A spotlight illuminated the table, and a silky voice rang out from the overhead speakers. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've reached tonight's ultimate prize round, and this time we're raising the stakes." Jack raised an eyebrow as a hush fell over the room. A pair of guards escorted a figure onto the central stage, a tall, lithe woman with radiant silver-blue skin. Her long dark hair shimmered as if laced with stardust, and her striking emerald eyes scanned the room with icy defiance. She wore a simple, elegant dress that contrasted with the heavy collar glowing faintly around her neck. "Behold, the rare and exquisite Kael'ara," the announcer continued, their voice dripping with theatricality, "a living masterpiece of genetic engineering, offered tonight to the boldest of players. Win this round and she is yours." Jack felt his stomach churn. This wasn't what he'd signed up for. Sure, he'd gambled in some seedy places before, but offering someone as a prize? That was low even for Rix's station. "Outrageous," muttered the McAfee trader, folding his cards. The android simply stood and walked away, its logic circuits apparently unwilling to engage in the unethical game. That left Jack and the Zakoran. The mercenary's yellow eyes gleamed with predatory delight. He didn't hesitate to push all his remaining chips forward. "All in," the Zakoran hissed. Jack hesitated. He could walk away, let the creep win and move on with his life. But Kael'ara's eyes met his just for a moment. They weren't pleading exactly, but there was a desperate, silent message in them. "Don't leave me with him." Jack sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. "Aw, hell." He shoved his entire stack of chips forward. "I'm all in too." The dealer's mechanical arms dealt the final cards. Jack barely breathed as he checked his hand, a straight flush. He glanced at the Zakoran, whose lip curled in frustration. The reptile slammed his cards down, 3 of a kind. "Winner, Jack Carter," the dealer announced. The crowd erupted into cheers and groans, but Jack barely noticed. Kael'ara was led off the stage toward him, the heavy collar still around her neck. "Congratulations, human," she said, her voice smooth but cold. "You've just made yourself a very dangerous enemy." Before Jack could respond, a deep, menacing voice cut through the noise. "Not so fast." The crowd parted as Vorek Klin strode forward, his hulking frame dwarfing the guards around him. His scarred face twisted into a cruel grin. "She belongs to me," Vorek growled, "and I don't take kindly to thieves." Jack froze, his eyes narrowing as Vorek Klin stepped forward. The hulking alien was everything Jack hated in a person, entitled, brutal, and dangerous. Vorek had the reputation to back it up too, a slaver with a tight grip on the darker underworld of Rix's station. Jack had no illusions. This wasn't just bluster. Vorek wouldn't hesitate to spill blood in public if it suited his purposes. The crowd parted further, the onlookers clearly torn between fear of the slaver and their morbid curiosity. Security guards hung back, pretending not to see the escalating confrontation. No one wanted to cross Vorek. Kael'ara stiffened beside Jack, her expression unreadable, but he caught the way her fingers tightened at her sides. She didn't like this guy any more than he did. She doesn't belong to anyone, Jack said finally, his voice calm but carrying an edge of steel. He stood from the table, pushing his chair back deliberately. His hands stayed loose at his sides, ready but not yet threatening. She's a person, not a carking prize. Vorek's grin widened, revealing sharp, yellowed teeth. Bold words from someone who clearly doesn't understand how things work here. That collar around her neck says otherwise. Jack's eyes flicked to the glowing collar and his stomach twisted. He wasn't sure what the device did exactly. Explosive failsafe, tracker, shock mechanism, but he'd bet his last credit it was something nasty. Vorek's whole setup reeked of control. Look, Jack said, keeping his tone measured. I won her fair and square in your game at your casino, so either back off or get ready to refund my buy-in and call it a night. Vorek's laughter boomed, filling the room with a chilling echo. You think this is about credits? Cute. But I don't care about the game, human. Kael'ara is mine, my property, and you're walking out of here alive only if you hand her over. Jack's heart pounded in his chest, but he didn't let it show. He could feel the weight of Kael'ara's gaze, and something inside him shifted. She wasn't just some damsel in distress. There was a sharpness in her eyes, a quiet determination beneath the surface. But that didn't mean she wasn't in danger. Well, Jack drawled, forcing a cocky grin onto his face. That's where we have a problem, pal. See, I've got this bad habit of not taking orders from people who threaten me. Real character flaw, I know. The crowd murmured uneasily, sensing the brewing storm. Vorek's expression darkened, his massive hand resting on the hilt of a curved blade at his hip. You're making a mistake, Vorek growled, taking a step closer. Jack tilted his head, his smile turning sharp. Funny, I was just about to say the same thing to you. Kael'ara's voice cut through the tension, low and deliberate. Vorek. She stepped forward, her tone as icy as her expression. This isn't the place, not with so many witnesses. Vorek hesitated, his eyes narrowing at her. You think that'll stop me? Not them, she replied, nodding toward the crowd. Them! Jack followed her gaze to the edges of the casino floor where a pair of station enforcers had finally taken notice of the situation. Their uniforms gleamed under the neon lights, and though they weren't moving towards the confrontation yet, their presence was enough to give Vorek pause. For now. Vorek spat something in his native tongue, then fixed Jack with a glare that could melt Durasteel. Enjoy your winnings while you can, human. This isn't over. With a flick of his wrist, Vorek turned and stormed out, his entourage trailing behind him like obedient dogs. The tension in the room eased slightly, though Jack knew it was temporary. Jack exhaled, running a hand through his hair as the adrenaline started to fade. Well, that went about as well as expected, he muttered. Kael'ara turned to him, her gaze steady but guarded. You've just made an enemy of one of the most powerful slavers in this sector. Do you have a plan for what comes next? Jack smirked, though the edge of exhaustion was creeping into his expression. Plan? Yeah, sure. Step 1, don't die. Step 2, figure out what Step 2 is. Kael'ara raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. You're either braver than you look or far more foolish. Probably both, Jack admitted with a shrug. But hey, you're free now, right? That's got to count for something. Her gaze softened, just a fraction. Free? She glanced at the collar still around her neck. Not yet. Jack frowned, stepping closer. What's it do? She hesitated, her fingers brushing the edge of the device. Pain compliance, tracker, and a kill switch if Vorek chooses to use it. Jack let out a low whistle. Damn. All right, first order of business, getting that thing off you. Then we'll figure out how to deal with your old boss. Kael'ara studied him for a long moment before giving a small nod. You really don't know what you've gotten yourself into, do you? Jack grinned, the cocky twinkle returning to his eye. Not a clue. But I've always been good at improvising. Jack's grin faltered as he glanced around the casino floor. The eyes of the crowd were still on them, but the initial thrill of drama was wearing off, replaced by hushed whispers and averted gazes. Vorek might have left, but Jack knew the kind of man he was. He wouldn't wait long to strike. Kael'ara seemed to share his unease. She stepped closer, her voice low and urgent. "We need to leave, now. Vorek's enforcers will already be repositioning." Jack didn't need convincing. He slid an arm around her waist, a move half protective and half practical, as he guided her toward the nearest exit. The station's neon lights reflected off the polished floors, casting shifting shadows that only added to his paranoia. "Any idea how to get this thing off you?" he murmured, nodding toward the collar around her neck. Kael'ara glanced at him sideways, her expression unreadable. "Not here. Vorek would have built in fail-safes. Attempting it now could set it off. We'll need proper equipment." "Great," Jack muttered, scanning the room for threats. "Add that to the list of things to do after we don't die." The two made it halfway across the casino before Jack spotted them. Two hulking thugs in Vorak's colors stationed near the exit. Their predatory gazes swept the crowd, lingering just long enough on Jack and Kael'ara to make it clear they were waiting for orders to act. "Change of plans," Jack whispered, steering Kael'ara sharply to the left. "We're taking the scenic route." Kael'ara didn't argue, following his lead as they ducked into a side corridor. The flashing lights and chattering gamblers faded, replaced by the dull hum of maintenance systems. The corridor twisted and turned, lined with unmarked doors and junctions that Jack hoped led somewhere useful. "Do you even know where we're going?" Kael'ara asked, her tone a mix of curiosity and skepticism. "Of course," Jack replied, glancing at her with a wry smile. "I always keep an escape route in mind. Occupational hazard." Kael'ara arched an eyebrow. "What exactly is your occupation?" "Right now? Not getting us killed." The banter was cut short by the sound of heavy footsteps behind them. Jack risked a glance over his shoulder and swore under his breath. The thugs had followed them into the corridor, and they weren't alone. 3 more had joined them, their imposing forms nearly filling the narrow space. "We're running out of time," Kael'ara said, her voice tight. "No kidding," Jack muttered. His eyes darted around the corridor, landing on a service hatch marked with warning symbols. He grinned. "Bingo." He pulled Kael'ara toward the hatch, prying it open with a grunt. A ladder descended into darkness, the faint sound of machinery echoing below. "After you," Jack said, gesturing toward the opening. Kael'ara hesitated for a fraction of a second, then climbed down with surprising agility. Jack followed, pulling the hatch closed behind him just as the thugs rounded the corner. "Where does this lead?" Kael'ara asked as they descended. "Not a clue," Jack admitted, "but it's got to be better than up there." The ladder ended in a dimly lit tunnel, the air thick with the smell of oil and ozone. Jack helped Kael'ara down, their movements quick and quiet. Above them, muffled voices and thudding boots suggested the thugs weren't giving up the chase. "This way," Kael'ara said, taking the lead for the first time. Her stride was confident, purposeful, and Jack had the distinct impression she'd navigated places like this before. They wove through the tunnels, dodging patrolling droids and slipping through narrow passages until the sounds of pursuit faded entirely. Finally, they emerged into a cramped but bustling hangar bay, its ceiling crisscrossed with pipes and exposed wiring. "This is where you plan to end up?" Jack asked, his voice laced with skepticism. Kael'ara smirked, her sharp features softening slightly. "It'll do." She pointed toward a sleek, battered starship tucked into the far corner of the bay. Its hull was scarred and one of its landing struts looked precariously bent, but it had the unmistakable air of a ship that could get them off the station fast. "Yours?" Jack asked. Kael'ara shook her head. "No, but its owner owes me a favor." Jack chuckled, shaking his head as they made their way toward the ship. "You're full of surprises, aren't you?" Kael'ara didn't reply, but the faint smile on her lips said enough. Jack's grin faded as his instincts kicked in. The casino wasn't just buzzing with curiosity anymore, it was shifting, closing in like a noose. Vorek's thugs wouldn't leave them much of a head start. "We need to move," Kael'ara urged, her voice low but insistent. Her sharp eyes scanned the room, pinpointing threats Jack hadn't even noticed. "Agreed," Jack said, taking her hand and weaving through the crowd. The glamour of the casino, bright lights, clinking chips, and drunken laughter, felt oppressive now. He kept his movements casual, though every muscle in his body screamed to run. Behind them, a towering alien guard in Vorek's colors barked orders into a comm device. Jack's pulse spiked. "We've got company," he muttered. Kael'ara glanced back briefly, her expression hardening. "They'll split up, cover all the exits. Vorek runs this station like a prison." "Good thing I've busted out of a few," Jack quipped, leading her toward a less obvious exit. They ducked into a side corridor just as the first thug spotted them, his shout echoing across the casino. Jack swore under his breath, quickening their pace. "This way." Kael'ara pulled him down a service passage. It was narrow and dimly lit, the walls grimy with neglect. She moved with purpose, her steps silent despite the urgency. "You've done this before," Jack noted, struggling to keep up. "Surviving?" Kael'ara shot him a sidelong glance. "More times than I care to count." The sound of boots pounding against the floor grew louder. Jack risked a glance back and saw two massive brutes barreling toward them, their bulky frames nearly filling the corridor. "They're gaining," he said, scanning the passage for options. Ahead, the corridor split into two paths. Kael'ara didn't hesitate. "Left." Jack followed, trusting her instincts. The left path led to a staircase that spiraled downward into the station's underbelly. They descended quickly, the air growing colder and more metallic with each step. "Any idea where we're going?" Jack asked between breaths. "Out," Kael'ara replied curtly. "There's a hangar bay near the lower decks. We can find a ship there." "Find?" Jack raised an eyebrow. "Borrow," she clarified with a faint smirk. Reaching the bottom of the stairs, they found themselves in a maintenance tunnel. The walls were lined with pipes that hissed steam intermittently, and the floor was slick with oil. The dim lighting cast long shadows, creating an eerie, labyrinthine atmosphere. "This is where Vorak's men catch up," Jack said, his voice tense. Kael'ara ignored him, her focus sharp. "Keep moving." As they navigated the tunnels, Vorak's enforcers closed in. Their shouts echoed through the maze, growing louder with each passing second. "They're hurting us," Kael'ara muttered, her frustration clear. "We need to lose them." "On it," Jack said. He grabbed a heavy valve on one of the pipes and twisted it hard. Steam erupted, filling the tunnel with a blinding, hissing cloud. "Clever," Kael'ara admitted, a rare note of approval in her voice. "Stick with me and you'll see plenty of that," Jack said with a grin. They darted through the steam, turning corners and ducking through narrow passages until the sounds of pursuit began to fade. Finally, they emerged into the hangar bay. The vast space was cluttered with ships of all shapes and sizes, from sleek starfighters to bulky cargo freighters. Mechanics and droids bustled about, oblivious to the drama unfolding nearby. Kael'ara scanned the ships quickly. "There," she said, pointing to a small, well-worn vessel tucked into the corner. "It's fast and maneuverable." Jack raised an eyebrow. "And you're sure the owner won't mind us borrowing it?" Kael'ara gave him a wry smile. "He owes me." Before Jack could ask for details, a familiar voice boomed behind them. "End of the line, Terran!" They spun around to see Vorak himself, flanked by a squad of enforcers. The crime lord's smug grin twisted into a sneer as he stepped forward, his hand resting on the hilt of a vicious-looking energy blade. "You've made a grave mistake," Vorak growled, his eyes narrowing on Jack. "No one steals from me." "Steal?" Jack said, his tone mock-offended. "She was a prize. I won her fair and square." Vorek's lips curled into a snarl. "You'll regret those words." Kael'ara stepped forward, her posture defiant. "The only one regretting anything will be you, Vorek. You're out of your league." The crime lord barked a laugh. "Brave words for a slave." Kael'ara's eyes burned with fury. Before Vorek could react, she lunged forward, a hidden blade flashing in her hand. The enforcers hesitated, caught off guard by her sudden attack. "Jack, get to the ship," she shouted. Jack didn't argue. He sprinted toward the vessel, firing up its engines as Kael'ara fought off their pursuers with a mix of agility and precision. The ship roared to life, its thrusters glowing as Jack maneuvered it into position. "Kael'ara!" he called, opening the hatch. She darted toward the ship, narrowly avoiding a blast from Vorek's weapon. Jack reached out, grabbing her arm and pulling her aboard just as the ship lifted off. Jack nodded, his grin softening into something warmer. "Together it is, then." The ship shot out of the hangar bay, dodging blaster fire and pursuing vessels. Jack's hands flew over the controls, his focus razor sharp. "Can you lose them?" Kael'ara asked, her breathing heavy from the fight. "Watch me," Jack replied with a cocky grin. The ship weaved through the station's external structures, using the environment to outmaneuver their pursuers. Finally, they broke free into open space, the pursuing ships falling behind. Kael'ara slumped into the co-pilot's seat, her expression a mix of exhaustion and relief. "That was impressive," Jack smirked. "Told you I'm good in a pinch." Kael'ara met his gaze, a faint smile tugging at her lips. "I might actually believe you now." As the adrenaline began to fade, Jack leaned back in his seat, letting out a long breath. "So, what's the plan now?" Kael'ara's smile faded, her expression turning serious. "Now we make sure Vorak pays for what he's done, and we make sure he never comes after us again." Jack nodded, his grin returning. "Sounds like a plan." The ship drifted toward the small moon orbiting the gas giant. The dark expanse of space felt like a barrier between them and the danger they had left behind. A comforting silence settled over them as they neared the outpost, its faint glow illuminating the bleak landscape below. As they touched down in one of the hidden docking bays, Jack was the first to step out. The air was thick with the scent of burning fuel and industrial-grade alloys. The atmosphere felt heavier here, oppressive almost, but it was better than being hunted. Kael'ara followed him out of the ship, her steps steady and purposeful. The port was a far cry from the glitzy casino they'd just escaped. This was a place for those who wanted to disappear. Smugglers, criminals, mercenaries, none of them good people, but for now it was their best shot at survival. Jack took a deep breath, the humid air filling his lungs, a stark contrast to the sterile, recycled air of the ship. "Well, looks like we've arrived at the underbelly of the galaxy," he muttered, glancing around. Kael'ara surveyed their surroundings, her senses on high alert. The marketplace was alive with strange and dangerous creatures, the buzz of alien languages and the clink of metallic wares filling the air. But Kael'ara seemed to blend into it seamlessly, her eyes scanning the crowd for any sign of danger. "This place isn't exactly paradise, but it'll do," Jack said, trying to shake off the feeling that they weren't entirely safe yet. Kael'ara's response was low but thoughtful. "It'll do for now, but we can't stay long. Vorak has informants everywhere." Jack grinned, his hands on his hips. "We better make it quick then." They moved through the crowded streets of the port, passing traders and shady characters with hidden weapons. Jack didn't mind getting his hands dirty, but he had no intention of taking on an entire station full of criminals. They needed to stay under the radar. "So, where are we headed?" Jack asked, glancing at Kael'ara. She was tense, but something in her demeanor had changed. The weight of her past seemed to hang heavy, but her resolve had hardened. "We need supplies first, then I know someone who might be able to help with Vorak." "Someone you trust?" Jack asked, raising an eyebrow. "I trust them," Kael'ara said quietly, "but I'm not sure how much they'll be willing to do for me." "Well, we don't have the luxury of time," Jack said. "Lead the way." As they made their way deeper into the port, Kael'ara opened up a little more about her past. She told Jack about her life under Vorak's control, how she'd been taken as a child, trained to fight, and used as a tool for his cruel entertainment. Each word seemed to carry the weight of years of pain, but her determination shone through. "You've been through hell," Jack said after a long pause, "but you're out now, and Vorak? He doesn't get to win." Kael'ara stopped in her tracks, looking up at him. The raw intensity in her gaze was almost too much to handle. "You think it's that simple?" "No," Jack said, his voice steady. "But I'm not giving up, and neither should you. We're going to make sure he regrets coming after you." She stared at him for a moment longer, and then, just as suddenly, a slight smile tugged at the corner of her lips. "You're not what I expected." "Good or bad?" Jack asked, a playful glint in his eye. "Good," Kael'ara said, her smile widening just a little. Surprisingly good. The dimly lit alleyways of the port felt like the bowels of a forgotten world. The air was thick with the smell of burnt metal and oil, the clatter of gears and the low murmur of voices blending together like a swarm of insects. Jack followed Kael'ara through the narrow streets, her steps sure and swift, her eyes scanning every corner, every shadow. It was clear she was used to places like this, used to walking on the edge of danger. They reached an inconspicuous building, its exterior as dilapidated as the rest of the port. A flickering neon sign above the door read Solara's Exchange in a language Jack didn't recognize. Kael'ara hesitated for a moment before stepping forward, pushing the door open. The soft creak of hinges echoed in the silence. Inside, the atmosphere shifted. The air was heavy with the scent of stale smoke and something darker. The room was filled with the low hum of quiet conversations, hushed murmurs that ceased the moment Jack and Kael'ara entered. The patrons, scattered groups of aliens, bounty hunters, and mercenaries, shifted their gazes toward the newcomers but quickly looked away, uninterested in getting involved in what promised to be another transaction of some kind. Behind a worn counter, a woman leaned forward, her silver hair cascading down her back like a river of molten moonlight. Her face was sharp and angular, with piercing green eyes that seemed to see through everything. Kael'ara's eyes softened, and a flicker of recognition passed over her features. "Solara," Kael'ara greeted, her voice even but tinged with something Jack couldn't quite place. The woman raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Kael'ara, I never thought I'd see the day you'd come crawling back to me. What's your plan this time?" Her voice was like silk, smooth but laced with a sharp edge. Kael'ara stepped forward, crossing her arms. "I need information. Vorek's after me. I'm not leaving until I have a way to make him regret ever thinking he could control me." Jack couldn't help but notice the shift in Solara's demeanor. There was a moment of tension in the air, a quiet understanding between them. Solara had probably seen the same desperation in hundreds of faces, but there was something about Kael'ara, a warrior who wasn't ready to be broken, that made her different. "And you think I'll just help you out of the goodness of my heart?" Solara leaned back, folding her arms. "I don't work that way, Kael'ara. You're going to have to give me something in return." Jack stepped forward, his eyes narrowing slightly. "What exactly are you asking for?" Solara's gaze flicked toward him, sizing him up. "Who's the human?" she asked, her voice curious but assessing. "Jack," he said firmly, offering a slight nod. "I'm the one who's not handing her back to Vorek." "Bold," Solara muttered, eyeing him. "You know, it's rare that someone gets involved in someone else's mess and doesn't walk away halfway through. How do you know you won't regret it?" Her words were light, but there was a challenge in them, as if testing Jack. "I don't care about regret," Jack replied with a shrug. "I care about keeping a promise. So if you've got what we need, then let's cut the crap and talk terms." Solara's eyes gleamed with amusement. "Straight to the point. I like that." She looked over at Kael'ara, then back to Jack, her voice dropping to a low, serious tone. "All right, I've got information. Vorek's tight with a lot of people and his influence runs deep, but I know where you can hit him hardest. There's a shipping route he controls that's vulnerable, one that's set to move some highly valuable cargo soon. If you can intercept it, you'll be able to send a message. His reputation is all he has left, and losing face will make him slip up." "Give us the coordinates," Kael'ara said, stepping closer to the counter. "But there's a price, like I said," Solara continued, her lips curling into a sly smile. "I need something from you, one favor whenever I need it, and trust me, it won't be a small one." Kael'ara didn't hesitate. "Deal." Jack shot a glance at Kael'ara, but he didn't argue. He wasn't here to make friends, and they needed this information, and in a world like this, favors were currency. "Good," Solara said, passing them a small data pad. "Coordinates are loaded. I suggest you move quickly. Vorek's people will be looking for you soon enough, and I'm not going to be able to keep you hidden forever." Kael'ara nodded, already turning to leave. Jack followed closely behind, but he couldn't shake the feeling that they'd just walked into a much bigger game. As they made their way back to the ship, the weight of So'lara's words hung heavily in the air. Back aboard the ship, Jack and Kael'ara stood at the controls, staring at the blinking coordinates on the screen. The ship hummed quietly around them as the stars rushed past the windows. The plan was set, but the stakes had just been raised. Jack let out a long breath. So, this is it. We hit the shipping route, take whatever Vorax got coming, and send a message. Sounds simple enough. Kael'ara's face was hard, determined. It won't be easy. He won't just let it happen. We'll need to move fast and take them by surprise. We're going to need the element of surprise if we're going to make this count. Jack looked over at her, seeing something new in her. Resolve, yes, but also a quiet fire that hadn't been there before. I trust you, he said, his voice low but firm. We're in this together. We won't let him win. Kael'ara met his gaze, her lips tightening into a fierce smile. No, he won't. The ship hummed as it cut through the void, the stars outside a blur of light. Jack sat at the helm, his hands steady on the controls, but his mind was far from calm. Kael'ara stood behind him, leaning over the console, studying the coordinates and mapping out the plan. The shipping route will take them through the Saltar Nebula, Kael'ara said, her voice cool and collected. It's a perfect choke point. If we intercept them there, we'll have them cornered. Jack nodded, running his fingers through his hair. We'll need a good distraction, something to keep their attention long enough for us to make the hit. Leave that to me, Kael'ara replied, a glint of mischief in her eyes. I've got a few tricks up my sleeve. Jack didn't doubt it. Kael'ara was a master of tactics, and her reputation as a deadly hunter spoke for itself. But even with her skill, they were going up against Vorax men, merciless thugs with a reputation for cruelty. How many ships are we looking at? Jack asked, adjusting the ship's trajectory to line up with the coordinates. At least 3, Kael'ara said, pulling up a holographic display of the route. We'll need to hit them fast and hard. They won't have time to call for backup once we strike. Jack's eyes narrowed as he glanced over the display. We'll need to get them off balance. If we can disable their engines or weapons systems, we'll have the upper hand. Kael'ara stepped up beside him, leaning in close to the console. I can board one of their ships and disable their power systems. Once they're on the back foot, you move in with the main ship and take out the other 2. Jack studied her for a moment, impressed by the simplicity and efficiency of the plan. That could work, he said. But we'll need to make sure we don't get swarmed. We have to hit them fast. I'll make sure of it, Kael'ara said with a nod, her eyes hardening with determination. They won't even see us coming. As they neared the Saltar Nebula, the atmosphere shifted. The air felt thick, the tension unmistakable as they prepared for the strike. Jack and Kael'ara double-checked the ship's systems, ensuring everything was in working order. It wasn't just a heist. They were playing for Kael'ara's life. 5 minutes to the choke point, Jack called out from the cockpit. Kael'ara was already in motion, suiting up in her combat gear, her expression focused and unwavering. She gave Jack one last look before slipping into the shadows of the ship's cargo hold. She would be the first to act, using her agility and stealth to infiltrate one of the enemy vessels. Jack glanced at the console, watching the countdown as they approached the nebula's center. He'd already set a course to intercept the convoy from a position where they couldn't easily escape. It was a risky maneuver, but they didn't have the luxury of time. The nebula was a swirling cloud of gas and dust, the perfect cover for a quick, aggressive attack. The convoy was just ahead, 3 ships moving in a tight formation, their engines glowing with the telltale signs of their engines pushing them through the dense nebula. As they neared the convoy, Jack held his breath, waiting for the signal. Kael'ara's voice crackled over the comms. I'm aboard, she said, her voice low and calm. I've disabled their power grid. They're blind. Now it's your turn. Jack's fingers flew over the controls, his heart pounding as he fired the ship's weapons at the nearest enemy ship. The first volley hit its engines, disabling them with a satisfying burst of sparks and energy. The ship began to drift, helpless against their assault. He didn't wait for the others to react. With one swift motion, Jack swung the ship around, lining up a shot on the second vessel. This time he targeted its weapon systems, watching as the enemy ship's guns went silent, unable to return fire. "Two down," Jack muttered to himself. But they weren't out of the woods yet. The third ship was still operational, and if they didn't finish this fast, they'd be overwhelmed. "Kael'ara, I need a diversion," Jack called out, his eyes never leaving the controls. There was a brief pause before her voice returned. "On it." Suddenly, the third enemy ship exploded in a flash of light, its hull ruptured by a well-placed charge from Kael'ara's ship. The last vessel was now a flaming wreck, spinning out of control before it disappeared into the dense nebula. Jack let out a sigh of relief, but his relief was short-lived. They weren't done yet. Kael'ara's ship was still linked to the enemy vessel's systems, and she would need to make a quick escape before their backup arrived. With the convoy neutralized and Vorek's cargo in their possession, Jack and Kael'ara were victorious, for the moment. But they knew the fight wasn't over. Vorek would retaliate, and their enemies would be hunting them down. Back aboard the ship, Kael'ara walked into the cockpit, her face flushed with success. "You were right. We hit them hard." Jack smiled, though the tension in his shoulders didn't ease. "Yeah, but we're not out of danger yet. We'll need to move fast and get this cargo off planet before Vorek's people figure out what happened." Kael'ara glanced at him, her expression unreadable. "And then we take down Vorek once and for all." Jack nodded. "One step at a time. But if you're with me, we've got a damn good shot at this." The ship was in full flight mode, its engines humming as they sped away from the nebula, the wreckage of the enemy convoy still visible in the distance. Jack kept his eyes on the navigation console, his fingers flying over the controls as he plotted their next move. Every second counted now. They had successfully neutralized Vorek's convoy, but that didn't mean they were safe. They were deep in hostile space, and Vorek's forces would come looking for them. Kael'ara stood beside him, her eyes sharp as ever. She was scanning the readouts, ensuring they didn't miss any signals or radar sweeps. Her earlier success in disabling the enemy ships didn't mean they could afford to be reckless now. "We need to make the jump before they catch up," Jack said, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "Can you monitor the tracking systems? Make sure no one is tailing us?" Kael'ara gave a slight nod. "I'll handle it. You focus on getting us out of here." Jack didn't need to be told twice. He threw the ship into a high-speed trajectory, calculating the precise coordinates for a jump to an uncharted system. If they could make it to a remote area of space, they'd have time to regroup and plan their next move. The ship's hyperdrive systems were ready. He just had to hope they'd make it before Vorek's people tracked them down. As the ship accelerated through space, the atmosphere inside felt thick with tension. Jack could feel the weight of the heist on his shoulders, but there was something else, an unspoken connection with Kael'ara that lingered in the air. The adrenaline of the mission had passed, and now they were left with the aftermath. Both of them had seen the cost of their actions, and both of them knew they were far from safe. Kael'ara stood by the viewport, her eyes distant as she studied the stars outside. There was a quiet intensity to her, something deeper than just the thrill of the heist or the urgency of their escape. Jack couldn't help but feel drawn to her. "You did well back there," he said, breaking the silence. "I don't think we could have pulled this off without you." Kael'ara's gaze shifted to him, her expression unreadable. "It was a team effort," she replied, her voice soft but firm. "We both got what we wanted." Jack could tell there was more to her words than she was letting on, but he didn't push it. Instead, he focused on keeping the ship on course. They were almost to the jump point. "Just one more thing," Kael'ara added, her tone serious. "After we get out of here, we need to lay low. Vorek won't stop. He'll want us dead, especially if he finds out what we took." Jack's jaw clenched at the mention of Vorek's name. He had no doubt that the warlord would come after them no matter what. But there was something else driving him now. He wasn't just doing this for Kael'ara anymore. He was doing it for himself, for the thrill, and for the chance to finally break free from the life that had always kept him chained down. "We'll be ready for him," Jack said, his voice steady. "But we'll need a plan, a good one." Hours passed as they made their way through the vast emptiness of space. Jack kept the ship on course, avoiding any detectable routes that might be traced back to them. But there was no guarantee they could outrun Vorek's forces forever. Finally, they arrived at an uncharted system, a remote star system far off the beaten path. It was the perfect place to hide out and regroup. Jack dropped the ship into a low orbit around a barren planet, its surface a cracked desert of dust and rock. They'd have time here, at least until they could figure out their next move. "Let's get to work," Kael'ara said as she turned from the viewport. "We can't afford to rest for long." Jack nodded. "What's the plan?" "We lay low for a bit," she said, walking toward the cargo hold. "We offload the goods, get some intel on Vorek's movements. Then we take the fight to him." Jack followed her, his mind already working through the logistics. "You think he's going to make a direct attack on us or send someone else first?" "He'll likely send a few ships to track us down first," Kael'ara said, pulling up a series of holographic maps and data feeds. "But once he figures out what we're after, he won't hesitate to come after us personally." Jack wasn't sure how much of a chance they had against someone like Vorek, but Kael'ara's confidence was contagious. There was something about her drive that made him believe they could take him down. "Let's make sure we've got a plan B, just in case," Jack said, taking a seat at the comms console. Kael'ara raised an eyebrow but nodded in agreement. "We'll need every advantage we can get." For the next few days, Jack and Kael'ara worked together in relative silence, preparing for whatever came next. They offloaded the stolen goods, ensuring everything was hidden and secure. Kael'ara took the lead, organizing the next phase of the plan and gathering intel on Vorek's movements. Jack focused on making the ship ready for another round of combat. Their bond deepened in the quiet moments between planning and action, but they never spoke of it directly. They didn't need to. The understanding was there, unspoken but undeniable. Jack had found a sense of purpose he hadn't felt in years, and Kael'ara had found an ally, someone she could trust. But there was still one more obstacle to overcome, the final showdown with Vorek. The days on the barren planet passed in a blur of activity. Jack and Kael'ara worked tirelessly, every moment spent preparing for the storm that was inevitably going to hit them. The quiet tension between them was tangible, but they both knew it was necessary. Vorek was coming, and it wasn't a question of if, it was a matter of when. The cargo hold was transformed into an impromptu armory, the goods they'd stolen from Vorek's convoy now serving as a trove of resources they could use against him. Kael'ara took the lead, pulling together weapons and tech with the precision of a seasoned warrior. Jack, for his part, did what he could, scanning the ship's systems, making sure the ship was in top condition for whatever might come next. One night, as they sat across from each other in the dimly lit cockpit, Jack looked at the data Kael'ara had gathered on Vorek's movements. A holographic map of the surrounding systems flickered between them. "I think we've got a chance," Jack said, his voice firm. "But we'll need to time it right. Vorek's forces will be closing in, and we'll have maybe one shot at taking them down." Kael'ara's eyes gleamed with the fire of a warrior who had fought and survived worse. She tapped a few commands into the console, bringing up tactical overlays. "Vorek's fleet is large, but it's not invincible. The trick will be taking out his command ship first. If we neutralize that, the rest of his forces will fall into disarray." Jack nodded, feeling the weight of the plan pressing down on him. "We get to his command ship. We cripple their coordination. What do we do once we're in?" "We board it," Kael'ara said. "I'll handle the ground assault. You'll be the distraction. Once we're inside, we take out Vorek. He's not as invulnerable as he likes to think. I'll have your back." Jack could tell she meant it. There was no hesitation in her voice, but something else lingered in the air, an unspoken bond that had grown between them. They hadn't spoken of it directly, but both knew their fates were now intertwined. He wasn't sure what exactly had happened over the past days, but he didn't care. Kael'ara was his ally, his equal, and together they'd make this work. The preparations were meticulous. They had salvaged everything from the cargo they'd stolen, using it to retrofit their ship with additional firepower and cloaking systems. Jack rigged the engines for a burst of speed they could use to gain an advantage when it came time to flee, while Kael'ara focused on the more hands-on details, building weapons, reprogramming the ship's security systems, and ensuring their plan was airtight. "Jack," Kael'ara said one evening, her voice low but steady as she looked over the final pieces of their weaponry, "when we board his ship, I need you to stay focused. We can't afford any mistakes." "I'm with you," Jack replied, his hand resting on his blaster. "We do this. We do it right." "Good," she said, turning to face him. Her gaze softened for a moment, but only briefly. "You're more than just a distraction to me, Jack." He met her eyes. There was a strange, unspoken weight to her words, but before either of them could say anything more, the console buzzed, breaking the moment. "Vorek's fleet is on the move," Kael'ara said, her voice a touch sharper. "They're coming." Jack didn't need to be told twice. He stood, moving quickly to the pilot's seat, his mind snapping back into focus. The time had come. Their plans were set. Now it was a matter of survival. For a moment, everything fell into a tense silence as Jack set the ship's course. They were locked in, no turning back now. The quiet, lonely planet below them felt miles away, insignificant in the face of what they were about to do. "You ready?" Jack asked, glancing over at Kael'ara. She gave him a faint smile, though it was hard to say if it was out of amusement or something more. "As ready as I'll ever be," she replied. They both knew the risks, but the plan was in motion. They couldn't afford any more time. Vorek's fleet was already close enough to be detected by their sensors. The race was on. With the final preparations complete, Jack fired up the engines, sending the ship into high-speed trajectory toward Vorek's fleet. The dark expanse of space stretched out before them, filled with the unknown. But Jack and Kael'ara were more than ready. "Prepare for evasive maneuvers," Kael'ara said, her voice low and focused. "Once we're within range, I'll launch the first attack. We'll hit them fast and hard." Jack tightened his grip on the controls. "And when we're in, I'll get us in close to Vorek's ship. You make sure nothing gets past us." The plan was set. They had one shot at this. But with Kael'ara by his side, Jack knew they had a chance. The ship shuddered as the engines roared to life, pushing them forward at breakneck speed. The sensors blinked red, signaling the approaching fleet. Jack's fingers flew over the console, locking in their evasive maneuvers. The countdown in his mind had begun, every second feeling like an eternity. "We've got maybe a few minutes before they realize we're here," Jack muttered under his breath. He glanced at Kael'ara, her face set in grim determination. She was already armed, her blaster ready, her hands steady. Kael'ara's voice cut through the tension. "Hold your course. We need to get within range of Vorek's command ship. Once we're close enough, I'll disable their shields." Jack nodded, swallowing his nerves. This was it, no turning back. As they entered the outskirts of Vorek's fleet, the massive ships loomed in front of them like dark shadows in the void. They were surrounded, but Jack wasn't fazed. He knew what he had to do. His fingers danced over the controls, ready to engage the ship's full speed if they had to make a quick escape. The first blast of fire came out of nowhere, a sharp streak of red cutting across the space between them. Jack swerved the ship sharply, just narrowly avoiding the shot. "Damn it! They're on to us!" he growled, flipping the ship into a barrel roll, sending another wave of fire skimming past them. "Not for long," Kael'ara said, her voice cold. She leaned forward, typing into the console with practiced precision. A few moments passed before the hum of the ship's weapon systems intensified, a low rumble vibrating through the hull. "Locking onto their lead ship," she continued. "I'm activating the EMP." With a single press of a button, the ship emitted a wave of electromagnetic energy, surging outward to disrupt the nearby vessels. A pulse of bright blue light erupted from the ship, creating a ripple through the space around them. The closest enemy ship flared with electrical sparks before its weapon systems powered down. "Yes," Jack exhaled. "We've got a crack in their defenses." The EMP is strong enough to cause a short-circuiting feedback effect, but not enough to destroy or severely damage their ship or technology. However, the pulse has a very specific and almost poetic effect. It disables the collar. The shock feedback is just enough to cause the collar's internal locking mechanism to malfunction, triggering the collar's deactivation. There's a brief moment of tension. Did it work? Did the collar survive the blast? Then, with a small, almost unnoticeable click, the collar falls off Kael'ara's neck. It lands on the floor with a hollow thud, a tangible symbol of her freedom and a clear turning point in their journey. It's also a moment of triumph for Jack, who can now see the weight lifted from her, figuratively and literally. Kael'ara, still in the middle of the firefight, momentarily glances down at the collar, her shock giving way to disbelief. For the first time since meeting Jack, she feels an overwhelming sense of release and empowerment. Jack, seeing her reaction, immediately reaches over and briefly holds her hand, as if to protect her from the chaos of the moment. But there's a look shared between them, something deeper than words. This moment isn't just about the collar being removed, it's about Kael'ara choosing to take control of her own fate, and Jack choosing to be there for her, not just as a rescuer but as a partner. The EMP's effects were a perfect and dramatic way to free her without making it feel too easy or abrupt. Their victory was short-lived. Vorak's ships retaliated almost immediately, a volley of missiles launched heading directly for them. The ship rocked violently as one missile clipped the side, sending sparks and warnings flashing across the dashboard. "Hang on!" Jack shouted, throwing the ship into a sharp dive. He spun the ship around, dodging another wave of fire that came dangerously close. "Get us closer!" Kael'ara barked, her eyes locked onto the tactical screen, her finger hovering over the control for the ship's hidden torpedoes. "We can't take them all out from here!" With a grunt, Jack yanked the ship into a tighter loop, aiming directly for Vorak's flagship. His pulse was racing, but he was calm, his instincts kicking in. This was the moment. The enemy fleet scrambled to react, their weapons charging, but Jack had already cut through their perimeter. The ship's nose dipped low, heading straight for the massive command ship that loomed like a fortress. "Now!" Kael'ara shouted. The ship's torpedoes launched, streaking across the void with a deadly hum. The first explosion rocked the command ship's lower hull, sending a burst of flame into the void. Jack grinned, but it was short-lived. They were now in the thick of it, and Vorak's remaining ships began to regroup, positioning themselves in a defensive formation. Jack swore, pulling up sharply, narrowly avoiding another explosion from the flagship. "Damn it! They're not backing down!" "Keep the pressure on!" Kael'ara shouted, loading up another wave of fire. "We need to break through before reinforcements arrive!" The ship bucked again as Jack punched it forward. The blast shields were down, and they were closing in on the command ship's vulnerable section. "I'll give you the opening," Jack said, his hand steady on the controls. Kael'ara leaned forward, her focus unbroken as she locked onto the target. She knew this ship like the back of her hand. The torpedoes fired again, a second wave crashing into the flagship's defenses. This time the damage was severe. The ship's energy field flickered and died, leaving it exposed. "We've got a clear shot!" Kael'ara called, her voice fierce. Jack nodded, locking on to the enemy's weak point. With a sharp, final maneuver, he dived in, positioning the ship directly in front of the flagship's exposed command center. Another blast, this time a direct hit, sent the flagship into a spin, its massive structure starting to crumble under the weight of their assault. "Targets down!" Jack shouted, feeling a sense of exhilaration, but it was quickly overshadowed by the chaos around them. "We're not done yet. Keep firing!" The next few moments were a blur of sound and movement as they continued to tear through Vorak's forces. The cockpit was alive with flashing lights, alarms blaring. But for all the chaos, Jack and Kael'ara moved as one, their bond growing stronger with every blast. The ship lurched again as another explosion rocked the hull, and Jack gripped the controls tighter. "Time to make our exit," he said, voice tight. Kael'ara nodded, securing her weapons. "I've got the getaway route plotted. You just get us out of here." Without another word, Jack pushed the throttle to its maximum, sending the ship into a high-speed climb. Their ship shot upward, dodging fire from the remaining enemies. Behind them, Vorek's fleet was in disarray. His flagship was down, and the rest of his forces were too scattered to pursue them effectively. As they broke through the edge of the battle, Kael'ara allowed herself a brief smile of triumph. "We did it," she said, her voice a little breathless but filled with relief. Jack's grin was wide, a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. "Yeah, we did. But let's not stick around to celebrate just yet." With the enemy fleet in their wake, they soared into the unknown, the battle finally over for now. But they both knew one thing for certain. They weren't out of danger yet. Vorek would be back, but for tonight, they were free. The hum of the ship's engines was the only sound that remained as they soared through the silent expanse of space. The battle was over. Vorek's fleet was in ruins, and their victory was almost too surreal to grasp. Jack leaned back in his seat, his hands still gripping the controls, but his mind was elsewhere. His chest was tight, the weight of what they'd just done beginning to sink in. The adrenaline was wearing off, replaced by an aching exhaustion that made his muscles feel like lead. Beside him, Kael'ara had her arms crossed over her chest, her gaze fixed on the view ahead. The distant stars were nothing compared to the intense fire of the battle they'd just endured. She'd been in countless fights before, but this felt different. This was more personal. And for a moment she allowed herself to relax, just a little. "We made it," Jack said, his voice hoarse. It wasn't a question. It was a statement, a simple acknowledgement of the truth. They had done the impossible. Kael'ara didn't respond immediately. Instead, she unbuckled herself from her seat and moved toward the small cabin at the back of the ship, her footsteps light but purposeful. Jack watched her go, a quiet sense of admiration in his chest. It had been a dangerous mission, and though they were both alive, there was something more between them now. When she returned a few moments later, she held 2 glasses in her hands. The liquid inside shimmered with an almost ethereal glow, an alien drink from her people, something she hadn't shared with anyone before. She handed one to Jack, her expression softening. "To survival," she said quietly, her eyes meeting his. Jack took the glass, the cool surface sending a slight shiver through his fingers. "To survival," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper. He raised the glass in a silent toast and took a sip. It tasted strange, exotic, but in a way that was comforting. Kael'ara sat beside him, not quite touching him, but close enough that he could feel the heat of her presence. The space between them felt smaller now, the distance closing as the danger had passed. "You're quiet," Jack said, glancing at her sideways. "I thought you'd be celebrating." She didn't immediately answer, her gaze distant. Then, with a soft chuckle, she replied, "Celebrating? We just killed a lot of people, Jack. I don't think there's much to celebrate about that." Jack's smile faltered slightly, realizing what she meant. "I wasn't thinking about it like that. I meant, well, we're alive, right? We're free." Kael'ara met his gaze, and for the first time, Jack saw something vulnerable in her eyes. It was a fleeting moment, but it made his heart skip. She wasn't invincible, wasn't just the fierce warrior he'd seen earlier. She was someone who'd seen too much loss, too much death. "We are," she said, her voice softer now. "But freedom comes with a cost." Jack nodded, understanding. They had both been through their own hells, and though the battle was won, the consequences of it would linger. The ship was silent again as they shared the quiet moment, the weight of their words settling between them. Jack couldn't help but think of how far they'd come, from a random encounter at a casino to now, 2 fugitives on the run together. "You know," he began, breaking the silence again, "I never planned for any of this. One minute I'm just trying to survive the game, and the next I'm running for my life with you." Kael'ara tilted her head, a small smirk tugging at her lips. "And yet here you are, still breathing, still alive." Jack grinned. "You make it sound so simple." For a moment they sat together, the ship flying steadily through the vastness of space, each lost in their own thoughts. They had no clear destination, no definite plan, just the uncertain future ahead of them. Kael'ara sighed softly, then placed her glass down on the console. We're not out of danger yet. Vorek may be gone, but his allies will come after us, and there are others who will want to claim me for themselves. Jack looked at her, his expression darkening with concern. I won't let that happen, he said, his tone unwavering. I'm not leaving you. Not now, not ever. She raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by his conviction. You'd risk everything for me? Jack didn't hesitate. I'd risk everything for someone who's worth it. And you are, Kael'ara. You've shown me more loyalty in the last few days than anyone ever has. She didn't know what to say to that, but the softness in her eyes told him everything he needed to know. There was no turning back now. A small, almost imperceptible smile curved Kael'ara's lips. We'll see what comes next then. Jack smiled back. They didn't need to speak anymore. They knew what they had, and they both knew the future was uncertain. But for the first time in a long time, Jack felt like he had something worth fighting for, someone worth fighting for.